It is difficult to imagine a more ruinous companion in life than doubt. It forces a person to ceaselessly ponder the same thoughts, only to regret missed opportunities or committed evil. Doubt can become the sole obstacle to the realization of plans and steal victory. In the grim darkness of the far future, it was doubt creeping into damaged souls that became the gateway through which chaos carved its path. In the darkest years of the galaxy, doubt drove the weakest to the brink and made many others commit fatal delays. But among the warriors who bore on their shoulders the well-being of the Imperium, there appeared one who knew no doubts. The immaculate son and chief defender of the heart of Terra, whose valor and intellect preserved the Emperor's citadels, a noble warrior who fought to his last breath for the future of humanity, a mighty hero in golden armor, whose name was Rogal Dorn. The incubation capsule carrying the young son of the master of mankind, swept away by the tides of the Immaterium, came to rest on the cold planet of Inwit. In those days, as well as millennia later, the ice-bound surface of the world was scarcely warmed by the rays of its old withering star, whose last drops of warmth bathed Inwit in a crimson light, most reminiscent of a Terran sunset. An unusual connection with the dying sun fixed the planet in a position where one side was forever shrouded in darkness, while the other faced the unblinking gaze of the red star. Local inhabitants called the territory of eternal night the Shattered Earth. This name is fully accurate, for the dark half of the world is covered in labyrinthine ice fissures. Towering, impassable glaciers, lifeless mountain ranges, and contiguous dunes became sources of numerous legends and beliefs that shaped the culture of the planet's inhabitants. On the night when the capsule with the Primarch illuminated their sight like a golden meteor, beneath the icy surface of the world, as always, oceans slightly swayed with barely noticeable waves, where pale and unseen underwater monsters hunted each other. Besides the desolate planet, the ancient space stations and orbital heights that had watched over the ice-shrouded world for millennia through unending polar lights were witnesses to the Primarch's arrival. These void citadels, created in a lost past, silently orbited the planet long before the first legends appeared on it. The bright side of Inwit hardly offers more comfort than the dark side, as its surface is also covered in ice and sparse, lifeless rocks. At first glance, it might appear that the world holds no value, for its seas are buried under glaciers, its mountains lack treasures, and its fauna is useless. However, the harsh Inwit managed to foster unique people who not only survived in a world of death but also created a mighty civilization. The warriors of the planet are trained to endure any hardships, survive and never give up, as they, more than anyone else, know that a moment of weakness or doubt will spell death for those they are sworn to protect. Death on Inwit reveals itself in many forms. In icy storms that can envelop a person in deadly frost in an instant, in the claws of predators roaming the fractured land, in failed discipline that allows the cold to seep through a poorly sealed passage into a dwelling. These factors have shaped the planet's inhabitants into a certain type of people, strong, harsh, and dedicated to the survival of the community rather than the individual. Since most of the world's population leads a nomadic lifestyle, moving between subterranean ice hives to trade weapons, fuel, and technology, young warriors find opportunities to prove themselves in battle against their clan's enemies much earlier than expected. In ancient times, long before the deeds of the Emperor were proclaimed across Terra, shrouded in the age of strife, the people of Inwit began forging their own realm among the stars. Each world that fell under the new Empire's control was assimilated, restructured, and fortified. Conquests opened new avenues of knowledge and expanded cultural boundaries, yet Inwit itself remained unchanged even after it became the center of a star empire. The ice hives and clan conflicts persisted, and while starships conquered new planets, the old leaders of ancient dynasties continued to rule Inwit as they always had. This conservative yet burgeoning stellar empire became the formative environment for Rogal Dorn, its future emperor and warlord. Few sources remain that recount the early years of the young Primarch, but it is known that from the cold and darkness of Inwit, a boy soon named Rogal from House Dorn was saved by the patriarch of a clan. At that time, the head of the Icy caste and the Dorn dynasty was no longer young, but still a powerful warrior. He took the child into his family, raised him as his own grandson, and taught him tactics, strategy, and diplomacy. Despite the harsh reality, the patriarch was a kind and loving grandfather to Rogal, earning an eternal place of honour in the Primarch's heart. According to some accounts, Dorn valued the memory of his adoptive grandfather so highly that he always kept a fur-trimmed cloak that once belonged to the old patriarch. It is believed that even decades after leaving his home planet, whenever he put on this cloak, the Primarch found solace on restless nights when nothing else would help him sleep. Rogal Dorn's innate talents allowed him to advance the Empire further than anyone before him. The Primarch created and trained armies, built unprecedented starships, and even tamed the silent relics of antiquity that lingered in orbit around Inwit. 40 standard years after the death of the Patriarch who had taken Rogal in, the ships of the Great Crusade descended upon the planet. The Master of Mankind found not only a lost son, but also an entire star system on Inwit, already a ready-made instrument of war. The first meeting between the Emperor and Rogal Dorn took place on the command deck of the colossal spacecraft Phalanx, which had hung uselessly in the orbit of Inwit for millennia, brought back to life by the genius of the Primarch. Rogal intentionally chose the orbital fortress for the meeting, wanting to demonstrate that all his military resources, as well as himself, would loyally serve the Imperium. The Master of Mankind greeted Dorn as a long-lost son, and said that he was returning control of the Phalanx to the Primarch, believing that the best use for this exceptional spacecraft would be as the fortress of the 7th Legion Astartes. According to ancient records, during the era of the Great Crusade, the Emperor often travelled aboard the Phalanx, admiring the uniqueness of the enormous battle station capable of warp travel. From that momentous meeting with his father, Rogal Dorn became his devoted companion and protector. He never sought favour or praise, nor acted for his own benefit. The Primarch was a living embodiment of truth, incapable of lying even in situations where a small deception could help his cause. Admiring this quality, the inhabitants of Macragge, the capital of the Ultramar realm, erected a statue of Rogal Dorn, hundreds of years later. Upon entering the Emperor's service, the Primarch of the 7th Legion led his fleet's expedition with unparalleled loyalty and zeal. It was believed that Rogal Dorn possessed one of the strongest military minds among the Primarchs, remaining disciplined and composed, yet capable of bursts of inspiration. Reserved but terrifying in anger, Dorn was a cautious and calculating commander whose relentless energy did not wane until the objective was achieved. The Imperial Fists Legion recognized the characteristics of their genetic father on the day of their meeting. Upon seeing his sons for the first time, Rogal Dorn said nothing and maintained his silence, even when the Legion's chapter master, Matthias, knelt before him and pledged his oath. Only after seeing his Space Marines in battle did the Primarch decide to break the formidable silence. Dorn thanked Matthias for his service and appointed him as the High Castellan of the Inwit system. In this role, the warrior was tasked with recruiting for 30 new regiments of the 7th Legion. Without hesitation and not looking back, Rogal Dorn led the Imperial Fists into the stars. For the next 16 standard decades, the Astartes of the 7th Legion fought at the forefront of the Great Crusade, relentlessly advancing from one war zone to another and earning high esteem from every military unit they fought alongside. The Master of Mankind bestowed upon Rogal Dorn armour of the same alloy of auramite and adamantium from which his own was made. Most of the unique golden armour was adorned with decorative representations of imperial iconography, and the shoulders were crowned by radiant aquilars with outstretched wings. The Primarch's image was completed by a red cloak made of heavy velvet, which lent Rogal a distinct resemblance to the warriors of the Custodes. This impression was further strengthened by the tactical bolter used by the Primarch, crafted in the likeness of the weapons of the Legio Custodes. The Emperor's guardians themselves gifted Dorn a unique bolter, having modified the mysterious system to fit the Primarch's hand. His favoured melee weapon was the massive chain sword known as the Storm's Teeth. This blade, too heavy for any other Primarch, was forged on Inwit long before the Emperor's arrival and could easily cleave not only flesh but also stone and iron. Upon achieving the status of Primarch, Rogal Dorn gained access to other more modern and powerful weapons, yet he remained loyal to the old sword of Inwit. In the history of the Imperium, there are numerous examples demonstrating the radical changes a Space Marine Legion underwent after meeting their own Primarch. These instances might lead to the thought that a valiant legion, altered for the worse after the acquisition of its genetic father, represents what their Primarch might have become had he not made certain erroneous decisions that diverted him from the Emperor's original design. However, Rogal Dorn and the Imperial Fists do not fall into this category. The Legion and the Primarch perfectly complemented each other and adhered to the same views and beliefs. The first members of the Imperial Fists were created from the populace of Terra. While most other legions recruited from specific regions or classes, the future Sons of Dorn could hail from any part of the throne world. This extended even to regions where other Space Marine legions had already claimed tithe rights. The Imperial Fists preferred recruits who demonstrated the greatest endurance of both mind and body. Typically, these were taciturn young men who spoke little but acted boldly. Additionally, preference was given to new recruits capable of silently enduring the painful processes of initiation into the Legion. This form of recruitment became a tradition preserved by the Imperial Fists for millennia. After reuniting with Rogal Dorn, the Legion began recruiting not only on Terra, but also on Inwit. According to official data, about 70% of the Imperial Fists were composed of natives of their Primarch's home world. However, the Terran component of the warriors, despite their small numbers, exerted a significant cultural influence on the entire Legion. For example, it was the Terrans who brought and spread the type of ritual combat otherwise known as the Duel of Honor. According to the rules, two Astartes wishing to settle scores with each other had to fight with simple swords. During the duel, the warriors not only resolved their conflicts, but also gained more glory, and served as a reminder to the Legion about the importance of his Terran roots. The care for preserving tradition and loyalty to the past is a crucial characteristic of the 7th Legion, embraced and developed by Rogal Dorn. A well-known result of this approach to conquests is the world of Necromunda, where the Imperial Fists achieved a significant victory over the Orcs occupying the outskirts of the Hive world. In gratitude, the planet's leaders expressed a desire to supply the Legion with new recruits from among their populace. Even before the discovery of their Primarch, the Imperial Fists paid considerable attention to how they were remembered by the people living in the territories they had conquered. Thus, at the late stage of Terra's unification, the 7th Legion crushed the cities of the Crystal Sea and erected the fortress of the 5th Circle on their ruins. The warrior lords of humanity vanquished the clan of wind-summoning sorcerers on the icy peaks of the Himalayan mountains, but lost 3 battalions in the battles. However, just a few days after the end of the war, Imperial bastions ascended into the frigid skies. Upon completion, the fruits of the 7th Legion's architectural mastery gazed down from the summits of the highest mountains on Terra, representing not only a marvel of superhuman genius, but also a constant reminder to the defeated. The power that conquered you has not gone anywhere. In the first 10 years of their existence, the Imperial Fists erected 600 citadels on conquered worlds, and it is rumored that the remains of fallen Space Marines are entombed in their foundations. By demolishing ancient structures on conquered worlds and erecting new, much better ones in their place, the 7th Legion demonstrated to the subjugated planets that they were now eternally bound to the Imperium, and henceforth obliged to follow its order. For if anyone thought that the old regime had not yet outlived itself, then from the formidable new fortresses would come those who would explain what happens to mortals in the event of disobedience. In those times of the earliest interstellar campaigns, some looked at the lands conquered by the 7th Legion and said they appeared as if the hand of the emperor had descended from the sky and clenched an unbreakable fist. The ruler of humanity was so fond of this metaphor that he personally ordered the legion to be named the Imperial Fists. Furthermore, he allowed them to use the laurels of victory as their heraldry. In response to this highest honor, Dorn's genetic sons predictably responded with silence. Reuniting with their primarch, the Imperial Fists found a father who fully shared and supported their views on the care for conquered territory. The integration of the father of the 7th Legion with his army can be confidently called the fastest in the history of the Imperium. Was it fate, or merely the highest coincidence? Yet the ideals of the Emperor of Mankind and the goals of the Great Crusade completely aligned with Rogal Dorn's worldview. And this was reflected in his sons, who became part of the Primarch's fulfilled hopes. Dorn confirmed the creation of the Templars, a squad of legionnaires who, at that time, acted as the Primarch's bodyguards and defenders of the Temple of Oaths aboard the Phalanx. Contrary to its name, it was not a place of superstitious worship, but a secular abode dedicated to the ideals of the Great Crusade. The temple was forbidden to anyone except Dorn and the Templars. It housed the tattered banners of defeated opponents and statues of fallen heroes. Rogal was convinced that a physical victory over the enemy, the destruction of his citadel, and symbols of faith still did not guarantee bringing about agreement. The Primarch believed that by destroying and taking away, he must grant the people something epic and fundamental, so that the population of the planet with their own eyes could see the superiority of the Imperium over their bleak past. For achieving this, Rogal Dorn was ready to pay any price. However, one should not assume that by spending effort on erecting architectural marvels for conquered planets, the Primarch was guided by kindness of his heart. On the contrary, all his actions were carried out solely from sober calculation. Nevertheless, remaining an idealist, Dorn valued the reasons for which he engaged in battle as highly as the outcome of the fight. His devotion to the cause of the Master of Mankind was not conspicuous due to Rogal's overall restrained nature, yet it sometimes manifested clearly during rare flashes of emotion. This was the case during the fateful clash with Conrad Kurz, who paid for his too gloomy prediction, as well as during the brief confrontation between Dorn and Ferrus Manus, who had a different perspective on the campaign conducted by the two legions. Each of the Primarchs had their own opinion about the silent and certainly powerful father of the Imperial Fists. Lemon Russ said that Rogal Dorn was swift and merciless, like the blade of an axe. The Primarch was close to his genetic sons in many qualities, but one experienced Terran psyker believed that Dorn had much more in common with ordinary people. Rogal's feelings and thoughts vaguely resembled some form of human ones, but where a mortal felt a spark of sorrow, pain, or hope, the emotions of the Primarch flashed like lightning. The minds of Space Marines were altered, cutting away the unnecessary and restructuring the remaining parts, whereas Rogal Dorn, and possibly his brothers, represented humanity embodied in an intimidating and majestic transcendence. During the Great Crusade, the 7th Legion acted as the strategic reserve of the Emperor's forces, thanks to the enormous fortress ship the Phalanx, which enabled it to change locations extremely quickly. The Primarch proved himself to be a talented strategist, particularly distinguished in urban battles, and thus, after several successful campaigns, he gained the status of a genius siege specialist. When the Emperor decided to build on Terra, a grand palace from which the Master of Mankind could govern the Imperium, he took the 7th Legion with him and, naming Dorn the Praetorian, entrusted him with the construction of the monumental edifice. The honor bestowed upon Rogal did not go unnoticed by the other Primarchs. The father of the Iron Warriors was furious upon learning that Rogal Dorn, confident in the palace he had built with his own hands, believed it capable of withstanding an assault by the formidable siege genius Perturabo. In speaking of how resilient the palace would be to an attack from the 4th Legion, Dorn did not intend to insult or offend his brother. His words were the truth, a reflection of Rogal's complete confidence in his abilities. However, this mattered little to Perturabo. He hurled a stream of caustic accusations at his brother, some of which shocked the chance witnesses. After the pejorative comments from his brother reached Rogal Dorn, the Praetorian decided to distance himself from Perturabo. From that day forth, the Primarchs seldom spoke and rarely conducted joint campaigns. To some, the mutual animosity between Rogal and Perturabo seemed unnatural, given that their similar traits should have fostered understanding. However, in reality, the similarities between the brothers were limited to their talent for constructing extraordinary architectural wonders and unassailable bastions, leading to rivalry rather than friendship. Each of these Primarchs gave the impression of being a stern and reserved individual, yet the origins of these traits lay in opposing places. Perturabo's silence hid grievances and hatred, manifesting in the decimation of the Legion and the mechanical and brutal subjugation of worlds whose inhabitants suffered greatly under the Iron Warrior's grip when the Imperium arrived. Conversely, Rogal's restraint stemmed from his straightforward nature, hiding a humanity and dedication to ideals which led the Imperial Fist to improve conquered worlds and remain on them until stable governance was established. Moreover, both Primarchs were incredibly stubborn and rarely voiced aloud what they concealed behind their facade of indifference. One's silence irritated the other, while the blunt honesty of the first provoked the fury of the second, culminating in their mutual inflexibility, which guaranteed the absolute impossibility of ending any dispute with a compromise. Years later, Rogal Dorn acknowledged his rivalry with his brother as one of his few weaknesses. Perturabo waged war ruthlessly and mercilessly, believing that the most horrendous losses were acceptable to achieve his goals. In turn, Dorn, faced with such a choice, would unhesitatingly make any sacrifice in the name of their father's ideals. Yet he did not condone thoughtless losses during a campaign. Relying on such disparate and contradictory strengths, the Great Crusade conquered the galaxy, bringing happiness to some of its regions and plunging others into nightmare. The triumph of Ulanor and the subsequent appointment of Horus as War Master triggered anger, envy, or rightful apprehension in some Primarchs. Rogal Dorn accepted his brother's ascension as calmly as any other command from the Emperor. The matter was not only that Lupercal was the best son of the Master of Mankind, with achievements no other brother could compare to. Dorn supported the War Master primarily because he never doubted the Emperor's decisions. The approval of the Primarch of the 7th Legion invigorated Horus, who saw Rogal Dorn as a wise and more experienced brother. The Imperial Fists, under the leadership of their father, demonstrated an efficiency second only to the 16th Legion. Horus was so impressed by the siege and defensive strategies employed by Dorn that he publicly admitted his inability to break through a fortress defended by his brother. Lupercal jestingly suggested that if he were to attack a bastion held by his brother, the war would last an eternity. After all, it would be a clash of the best offensive and defensive forces. Rogal Dorn led the first flotilla of Imperial Fists dispatched to Terra to transform the palace and strengthen the planet's defences. The result of the Primarch's work surpassed any expectations in its magnificence. By the time construction was completed, the palace had become the largest structure in the galaxy built by human hands. According to stories, on the day the guilds of artisans completed their final tasks, the workers laid down their tools and wept. The magnificent building of gold and silver evoked feelings of happiness and pride in anyone who saw it. The foundation pillars of the palace sank into Terra's mantle for tens of kilometers, while the high towers reached beyond the atmosphere. But the value of the titanic structure lay not only in its beauty and uniqueness. Through the efforts of Rogal Dorn, the palace became a bastion consisting of a series of fortifications that encompassed the entire continent, with cyclopean and pyramidal structures. By the creator's design, the palace complex was divided into two security perimeters, outer and inner, both of which had thousands of landing pads for small vessels and powerful defensive weapon systems. Different areas of the palace were protected by atmospheric domes, many of which were so vast that they had their own climate systems. However, only a few had the honor of witnessing true clouds drifting under the painted vaults of the Emperor's abode. According to unconfirmed reports, over 4 million rooms were built in the galaxy's main palace, a number so vast that a human lifetime would not suffice to explore them all. Besides the work on the palace transformation, the Imperial Fists conducted a colossal process of reinforcing the defense of the throne world as a whole. However, before the Legion could assemble on Terra in full, they were overtaken by events that entered history as the Horus Heresy. The fleet of the Imperial Fists encountered the frigate Eisenstein of Nathaniel Garrow, who had successfully left Istvan III before the tragedy. But Rogal Dorn did not immediately believe the words of the captain of the Death Guard, and even attempted to kill him for the dishonourable claims about the warrior's honour. Nevertheless, Garrow, along with several of his companions, eventually managed to convince the Primarch, using evidence preserved by the chronicler Euphrati Keeler. Believing in the horrific truth, Rogal Dorn once again demonstrated his resilience and loyalty to the Emperor. Without delay, the Primarch dispatched the majority of his legion to the Istvan system while he flew to Terra to personally inform the Master of Mankind of the betrayal and to lead the defense of the throne world. Using all available resources and the brilliance of his own mind, Rogal Dorn transformed the solar system into a fortified citadel with several impregnable defenses. Each defensive zone was constructed with the potential attack from the War Master's fleet in mind and, as the future would show, successfully fulfilled its intended purpose. However, a blow to Rogal Dorn's plan came from an unexpected direction. While the Primarch's attention was occupied with fortifying the distant boundaries of the system, an unexpected attack by enemies manifested itself at the very heart of Terra. Speaking of the 20th Legion of Primarch Alfarius, it is impossible to assert any events as absolute truth. Nevertheless, according to sources from the time of the heresy, it was he who sent a sabotage group to the Emperor's palace to humiliate Dorn and intimidate Terra's defenders with his power. Long before the onset of the troubling events that darkened the Imperium, Alfarius ordered several Space Marines of the 20th Legion to be hidden on the throne world, immersed in suspended animation. This allowed him to achieve success where all other traitors had failed. Agents of the Alpha Legion infiltrated the sanctum of the Imperial Palace and attempted an assassination on Dorn's life. The place was chosen deliberately. Before suspicions led Rogal to the sanctum, the saboteurs managed to rig the statues of the Primarchs located there with explosives. The planned explosion destroyed all the stone figures except the one depicting the father of the Imperial Fists and Alfarius himself. With this gesture, the Primarch of the 20th Legion demonstrated to Rogal Dorn just how extensive his network of agents was, and how deeply he could penetrate the heart of the Imperium if he so wished. Although yet another act of his brother's treachery grieved him, Dorn was not frightened by the incident and did not take any rash actions influenced by the attack. However, the Primarch took measures to prevent the explosion in the sanctum from becoming public knowledge, as such could demoralize the spirit. By Rogal Dorn's order, everyone present in the palace, including even Malcador the Sigillite and the warriors of the Legio Custodes, was forbidden from entering the sanctum. And yet it was impossible to completely conceal the presence of the Alpha Legion on the throne world, and thus the Defenders' disgraceful failure. The Lord Regent of Terra learned of the sabotage and expressed his critiques to Dorn. The conflict between the Sigillite and Rogal Dorn began on the day the latter was proclaimed the Praetorian, and during the years of the Horus Heresy it significantly intensified. It is said that the clash between the Lord Regent and Dorn resembled an invisible and silent war in its scope. The two main defenders of the throne world often held opposing views and frequently hindered each other in the name of their own interests. Protecting the Imperium in the way he deemed correct, the Primarch had to face a seasoned master of machinations, whose many years of intrigue experience surpassed Dorn's knowledge of such forms of conflict. Nevertheless, remaining as honest and straightforward as ever, the father of the Imperial Fists managed to maintain his position and achievements. As part of the organization for the campaign on Terra, Horus assigned the Alpha Legion several critical operations that no one could execute more successfully than the 20th Legion. The War Master desired to plunge the solar system into chaos, as well as to terrify its inhabitants and cause them to lose faith in the Emperor. Alpharius needed to penetrate the first line of defense organized by Rogal Dorn. For this purpose, the Primarch of the 20th Legion placed himself and all those present in the fleet, both warriors and crew, into stasis. The ships of the Alpha Legion reduced their speed to a minimum, aiming to decrease the thermal signature that might reveal them to the defensive systems. Thus, it took the fleet of Alpharius a standard year to cross the defensive perimeter. Essentially, during this time, the ships simply drifted towards the sun, remaining undetected due to their inactive sensors. The terrorist acts of sleeper agents flaring up throughout the solar system constantly distracted the attention of the Imperial defenders, eventually allowing Alpharius to successfully breach the first defensive line. The first objective of the 20th Legion became Pluto and its 5 moons. Alpharius directed his main forces to attack Hydra, the moon fortress of Pluto, where the primary station for astropathic monitoring was located. The traitor Primarch personally led the command and almost secured victory over the forces of the Imperial Fists, represented by only 30 ships against his 200. But the sons of Rogal Dorn, despite enormous obstacles and heavy losses, continued to provide decisive resistance to the Alpha Legion. Salvation came in the form of Dorn's arrival aboard the grandiose Phalanx. The flagship of the 7th Legion was accompanied by his vast fleet, as well as reinforcements from the Armada Imperialis. The swift arrival was achieved with the help of gravitational zones positioned throughout the system for the rapid movement of Loyalist forces. Not wanting to focus on anything other than Alpharius, Dorn immediately teleported into the hall of the Citadel, where his brother was located. The epic battle between two Primarchs was accompanied by the confrontation of powerful sons, the Templars on Dorn's side, and the elite Lernian Terminators of Alpharius. In the moment when the treacherous brother attempted to pierce Rogal with his pale spear, Dorn blocked the attack with his sword, then wrenched the weapon from Alpharius and severed his hands with his chainsword Storm's teeth. After this, the father of the Imperial Fists cleaved his brother in two, delivering a strike to his head. For a long time, the information about Alpharius's death on Hydra was considered official, but recently, reports increasingly contradicting this have been appearing. Be that as it may, with Rogal Dorn's victory in the duel, the forces of the Alpha Legion in the Pluto region lost their power and withdrew. Returning to Terra, Dorn commenced the final phase of fortifying the Imperial Palace. By the Primarch's decree, the towers and walls of the palace were clad in steel shields, and millions of artillery guns were positioned on newly constructed bastions for this purpose. Rogal's heart bled as he watched his own orders violating the perfection he had created, but fulfilling the task at hand was more important than beauty. In the early years of the war, Dorn often walked along the palace walls, overseeing the process. But soon he had no time for such actions. According to his sons, immersed in the strategy of Terra's defense, the Primarch ceased caring for his own well-being and stopped sleeping. Rogal Dorn said that the heart of the Imperium was protected by two walls, the outer of which was defended by his legion, and the inner by the Master of Mankind, fighting behind the Golden Throne. Should one of these walls fall, humanity would fall too. However, the Primarch never lost hope for victory, and called the war in the Imperium a dark moment that would pass if the defenders of humanity continued to faithfully perform their duty. By Dorn's order, his flagship Phalanx hung over Terra like a second moon. As it became known later, the mighty ship not only fulfilled its role as the protector of the throne world, but also survived the heresy without significant damage. The Primarch sent part of his legion to Mars, where the schism within the Mechanicum threatened to deprive Loyalist forces of vital weaponry, thousands of sets of Space Marine armor, Mark VI, and numerous munitions. The detachment of Imperial Fists carrying out this mission under the command of Captain Camba Diaz suffered heavy losses, but still fulfilled Dorn's order, delivering the weaponry to the planet which played a significant role in the defense of the palace. Together with the Imperial Fists, the citadel of the Master of Mankind was defended by the forces of the Blood Angels Legion. When Horus lowered the shield over the vengeful spirit, Rogal, along with the Emperor and Primarch Sanguinius, teleported aboard the treacherous flagship. But the warp-distorted teleportation separated Rogal Dorn from his father and brother, leaving the Primarch and his squad of chosen veterans to fight their way to Horus from the most distant edge of the flagship. This led to Dorn arriving late to the battle with Lupercal and being unable to contribute to the victory over evil. The father of the Imperial Fists met a different, much more tragic fate. It was Rogal Dorn who first discovered the shattered Emperor and the slain Sanguinius on the bridge of the ship. It is difficult to imagine the grief that befell the Primarch that day, yet he did not lose his resilience. Rogal delivered his fallen brother and the wounded father to Terra, and also heard from the ruler of mankind his last command on how to begin the restoration of the Imperium, once again proving that he was a true Praetorian. Placing loyalty and duty above his emotions, Rogal Dorn carried the father to the Golden Throne with his own hands. Only after fulfilling all the assignments did the Primarch allow himself to acknowledge the pain that gripped his heart. Dorn blamed himself alone for the tragedy, which led him to the idea of setting out with the 7th Legion on a great crusade. However, shortly thereafter, Rogal had to return to Terra, as Roboute Guilliman, the Lord Commander of the Imperium, announced the adoption of the Codex Astartes. Like other loyal Primarchs, Dorn was outraged by the suggestion to divide his sons, but did not ignite a new conflict, believing that he had already inflicted great damage upon the Imperium. On the day the ruler of mankind was struck down, Rogal Dorn's life entered a period that he considered the darkest in his fate. However, Guilliman's creation was about to fragment the Imperial Fists and destroy the remnants of peace that the Primarch retained in his heart. Rogal was shaken that the Imperium no longer trusted him and sought to dismantle the Legion that had safeguarded it for so many years. The Primarch showed no overt animosity towards his brother's idea, and for some time evaded the Reformation, engaging in the pursuit of traitors. Leman Russ and Vulcan, like Dorn, did not wish to divide their sons, which threatened to escalate into another civil war. This even led to the bombardment of the 7th Legion's strike cruiser, the Furious Angel, by the forces of the Imperial Navy. At the same time, Rogal's longtime adversary, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors, challenged his brother, a challenge Dorn could not refuse due to his particular nature and accumulated rage. The father of the Imperial Fists vowed to dismantle Perturabo's fortress and bring him to Terra in an iron cage. However, the issue of adopting the Codex Astartes remained unresolved. The loyalty to the Legion was ingrained in Dorn and his sons, and the division into chapters promised to be a painful and fatal process for them. To make the right decision, Rogal Dorn immersed himself in meditation with the aid of a device known as the Pain Glove for 7 solar days. The revelations that came to him indicated that the 7th Legion required redemption, a path that lay through pain and self-sacrifice. Only by the end of the 7th day did the Primarch realize that the Emperor of Mankind on the Golden Throne was not dying, but thinking, acting for the benefit of the Imperium, and watching over his sons. Rogal Dorn decided that the symbolic Pain Glove for the entire Legion should be a mission against the Iron Warriors, after which he would permit himself to adhere to the Codex Astartes. However, the battle in the Iron Cage did not result in redemption but a catastrophe for the 7th Legion. The Imperial Fists were unable to break through the fortifications crafted by Perturabo's genius. Dorn saw this but could not stop the war, and returned to Terra due to his stubbornness and anger towards his traitorous brother. Perturabo was in no hurry to annihilate Dorn's army, wishing to prolong the suffering of his former rival as much as possible. The 7th Legion would have been doomed in the Iron Lord's trap, but they were saved by the arriving Ultramarines fleet, led by Roboute Guilliman. Perturabo did not wish to fight a new adversary, and disappeared into the warp. The Primarch of the Imperial Fists conceded to Guilliman, and agreed to the second founding, but by then the almost annihilated Legion was so diminished that they left the battles and for the next 19 years focused solely on replenishing their losses. Rogal became one of the longest-lived Primarchs, but his fate can hardly be called fortunate, for the death or disappearance of each brother made his life increasingly miserable. In the 31st millennium, Dorn witnessed unpleasant changes in Imperium society, as more and more people began to call him and the other Primarchs demigods, but the protests of the Emperor's last son had no impact on the irreversible process. It is believed that Rogal Dorn fell in battle against the forces of Chaos in the year 781 of the 31st millennium. During that period, he led a squad of Space Marines opposing the First Black Crusade of Abaddon, the Despoiler. The Chaos fleet vastly outnumbered the forces of the Imperium, and the Primarch planned to strike a sharp blow to the enemy and then retreat until reinforcements arrived. Dorn and 3 companies of Imperial Fists executed a masterful series of boarding attacks on Chaos warships, disabling their engines and life support systems and capturing weapon batteries, causing the enemy ships to fire upon each other. Nevertheless, death caught up with the Primarch in a battle on a Despoiler-class battleship, which was then the flagship of Abaddon's fleet. After that battle, there were no survivors capable of telling the story of Rogal Dorn's last glorious fight. All that remained of the Primarch was his hand, returned by the Imperial Fists to the Phalanx. Since its discovery, the Primarch's hand has been the greatest treasure for his sons, and every acting chapter master has the right to engrave his name on the bones of the demigod. Dorn's descendants call this relic a reminder of their father's sacrifice and dedication, remaining an example for every Astartes. Throughout the ensuing millennia, the Imperial Fists have drawn inspiration from the remains of their Primarch. This gave them the strength to successfully withstand the Orc assault in the 32nd millennium and to confront the forces of Chaos in the 40th. However, it remains unclear whether the revered hand truly belonged to Rogal Dorn or if it found its way to the chapter's shrine by mistake. Even the seemingly obvious fact of his death may be questioned, as in the mid-32 end millennium, the resurrected Primarch Vulcan spoke with Conrad Kurz, suggesting that Rogal might still be alive. Though the Night Haunter was certain that he had foreseen the true fate of the Imperial Fists Primarch from the day they first met. According to Kurz, during the assault on the Chaos battleship, the former Praetorian was torn apart by numerous foes. The enigmatic fate of Dorn will continue to concern many of his devotees across the galaxy for a long time. It is impossible to prove whether he was truly killed or if he miraculously survived and will reveal himself at the most critical moment. But his example of an impeccable, utterly devoted and magnanimous warrior remains a beacon for the Primarch's descendants even millennia later. The Imperial Fists remember that their father never doubted and boldly faced the encroaching darkness. For Rogal Dorn knew this was what he was created for.